Hello again. One of the greatest ironies about the efforts of African and Caribbean nations to obtain financial reparations for the institution of slavery is that it is largely the citizens of those two regions who maintain the practice of slavery in Britain today. I was prompted to think of this yesterday when representatives of Ghana, Gambia and Lesotho said that they believed Britain owed them compensation for slavery. Then, this morning, I saw the case of a primary school teacher in London who has been sacked because it's come to light that she and her husband were keeping a child as a slave a few years ago in Britain. By an odd coincidence, the teacher in question is from Ghana. At her trial, the husband said that the child had cast a voodoo spell on him and his wife, and the sacked teacher blamed cultural differences for the conviction for keeping a slave. I give a link to reports of this case in the description to this video. This in turn caused me to remember that most of the cases of slavery that one sees in this country today involve black people, which is odd. For instance, I give a link to a report from the BBC in February which is headed Luton drug dealers jailed for modern slavery offence. 2 black guys of Caribbean heritage were sent to prison for slavery. I give to a link to a news item from May which tells us that a Nigerian living in Britain called Peter Omoruya has been convicted of slavery and human trafficking. In December, 3 black men in Wellingborough in Northamptonshire were issued with 10-year slavery and trafficking prevention orders. I give a link to this case as well. It is of course true that Eastern Europeans in Britain are also fond of practising slavery, but an awful lot of those convicted of such offences are of African or Caribbean heritage. I wonder why this might be. One explanation which I have heard is that this is of course the fault of white people. Just as those sexually abused as children have a greater chance of themselves growing up to be abusers, so too is it suggested that this is what has happened with the British Empire. The after effects of being subjected to slavery have, according to this reading of the case, been passed down across the generations, like a genetic inheritance, and now show up when black people start getting mixed up with slavery themselves in the modern world. I am bound to say that I find this explanation a little unconvincing. Another and more satisfactory way of looking at the situation is that the kingdoms of West Africa, which lay where modern countries like Ghana and Nigeria are now, the Ashanti for example, were always up to their elbows in the slave trade, even before the Europeans arrived there. The kings and merchants on the coast were only too happy to do business with the newcomers. Indeed, they were quite irritated when the British decided to put an end to the trade in slaves. Perhaps this is why some people from that part of the world wish to keep going with slavery. It's a form of rebellion against Britain's abolition of slavery. Perhaps this is what that teacher meant when she blamed cultural differences on her conviction for slavery. Whatever the explanation, it's a rummy business that on the one hand the representative of Ghana is calling for reparations for slavery, and then an actual Ghanaian turns out to have been keeping a slave in this country in recent years.